Hi, hello, welcome back, and I am really thrilled to introduce our first exciting special guest, of the year, Leanne Yao, and Leanne is going to be doing a workshop on relationship anarchy, so very much building on the discussions that we were having about resisting compulsory heteromonogamy a couple of weeks ago, last week, and looking ahead to our focus text on Emma Goldman, who is an anarchist, and although the term wasn't around in that day, quite a relationship anarchist. I will introduce Leanne. You will already have seen. Has everybody got a copy of this little handout? No. Great. Chris, could you possibly throw some back? Fantastic. So Leanne is an award-winning educator, sex-positive advocate, and queer therapist in training. Men's Health are correct in saying that they are a top influencer. Cosmopolitan are also correct in saying that they are a polyamory educator to follow. I've been following Leanne's work for several years, and it is absolutely fantastic. So I will be, I'm really excited about today's session. The way that it's going to work is that, first of all, Leanne will tell you a bit about what they do and how they got into it, and then it's going to be quite a discussion-based session, get your vocal cords warmed up, and then there will be a bit of time at the very end for some kind of further questions arising from the conversation, and just a kind of reminder, because we've got a new person in the space. The way that we do things is, if anybody needs to take time out, take a little break, that's absolutely fine. You can always go out if something comes up you need to deal with. If just don't have conversations in the room apart from the conversations that are part of the workshop, but you're always welcome to pop out and take a break if you need. I think that is absolutely everything, so without further ado, please give a very warm welcome round of applause to Leanne Yao.
Alright, thank you, Koshka, for a very lovely introduction. Humbled to be a first guest speaker, lecturer person for the year. Just going to kind of introduce myself. My name's Leanne, my pronouns are she, they, I really genuinely have no preference. I have been talking on social media, educating about non-monogamy and polyamory, it's a subset of non-monogamy, for over 3 years now. And so I'm here today to talk about the concept of relationship anarchy, which is like a very specific kind of life philosophy that is applied to relationships. I think something to just outline at the start is that relationship anarchy is not a specific relationship style. It's not a specific relationship structure. It is a philosophy that can be applied to all kinds of relationships. So even if you yourself, don't identify as non-monogamous like I do, I hope that what I'm about to say will still be relevant, to your lives, and will hopefully give you something to think about, not just for your studies, but for your relationships and for your life in general. I'm just gonna start with a little kind of thought exercise. Okay. Something that relationship anarchy talks about is like the concept of commitment and trying to widen the definition of commitment. Commitment has a very specific meaning, in kind of traditional relationships. If people are willing to, I know it might be kind of scary, but like if people are willing to kind of just raise their hands and shout out kind of some definitions of commitment, or like, you know, just kind of things that commitment is related to. You know, like, yeah, that's your space to do that now. Yeah?
Loyalty.
Sorry, who's that?
Loyalty.
Loyalty, yeah, so loyalty is one. So can you, would you mind elaborating on kind of what you mean by loyalty?
Well, definitely loyalty according to, sorry, this might sound a bit like a cop-out, but how those people in the relationship define loyalty and being able to come to an agreement. And so once you've come to that agreement, then subscribing to that loyalty, if that makes sense. Because some people have different definitions. I appreciate I haven't it can be whatever, really.
Yeah, okay, so, you know, I think you've touched on a point there, like commitment and loyalty, you know, like it can mean like a variety of things. But can people give some more specific examples of what commitment or loyalty might look like, you know, in terms of like things that you do to demonstrate that commitment? Yeah?
I mean, I feel like commitment is also quite a lot about creating a comfortable, like, environment in a relationship. So, for example, if one partner says that I'm not comfortable doing that, this makes me feel unsafe, then one would respect that and then later on implement or don't do something specific in order, so that would be also kind of commitment, like commitment to an act.
Yeah, commitment to an act, yeah. And those acts can be like a variety of things, right? It could be commitment to seeing each other a certain number of times a week, right, in the early stages of dating. Or it could be, yeah, like commitment to work towards building a family. It could be working towards, you know, buying a house together, marriage, right? Like there's kind of lots of different steps that have traditionally been associated with the idea of commitment. And typically the elephant in the room is that commitment is very much aligned traditionally, you know, with being in an exclusive monogamous relationships. I don't know what, like how much kind of reading you guys have done so far. Koshka, you mentioned, like, you alluded to kind of some stuff about like heteromonogamy. So I'm kind of going in blind here, but yeah, if just to kind of rehash that again, I suppose. Yeah, like a lot of people feel that, you know, there is one type of way to show commitment. You know, there is a concept called the relationship escalator, which is the kind of like a prescribed set of steps that you take, you know, to demonstrate commitment in a romantic relationship. It's called the relationship escalator and not like the relationship ladder or the relationship stairs, because when you get on an escalator, you just kind of stand on it and you go up unconsciously, right? You don't have to put any effort into it, it just kind of happens. And that's kind of meant to demonstrate how, yeah, like a lot of people don't think about kind of the steps that they're taking. They feel like they should get married, or they should have children, or they, you know, should buy a house with their partner and, you know, be in a monogamous relationship, because that's what everyone does and that's what they feel like, you know, like that's what's expected of them. Particularly for women in society traditionally, you know, we've been taught that, yeah, like kind of getting married is like, you know, your main goal in life even. And I think that, you know, we're kind of very much departing from that now, but that was the traditional narrative for a very long time. So, yeah, so the relationship escalator is kind of something that is very much questioned under the concept of relationship anarchy. So you guys probably know, you know, about just political concept of anarchy. I would be willing to bet you probably know more about it than I do, because I didn't study political science at uni. I studied law. Yeah, the anarchy is often associated with chaos. Right? Like I think a lot of people hear anarchy, and you know, in common parlance, people think like, you know, there's no rules. But more accurately, it's about having no assumed rules. You know, it's no assumed hierarchies and no assumed commitments in this case. So relationship anarchy, broadly speaking, is a life philosophy that says you do not have to follow what society expects you to do with not just your romantic relationships, but just with any relationships. You know, the boundaries between what is considered platonic, what is considered sexual, what is considered romantic are a lot more blurred than we think. And what looks like commitment or loyalty or, you know, kind of security, a safe space, you know, in a relationship can differ according to the individual, and you and the people that you create connections with are allowed to, you know, co-create that according to what you want and not necessarily what people expect of you or like what you feel like you should do. So, okay. Yeah, so that's just a bit of primer on relationship anarchy, the relationship escalator, and kind of hopefully getting you thinking about like ideas of like what commitment means. And on the back of this handout, which I didn't have a part in creating. This is really lovely. If you look at the very back, you'll see a little graphic here by Sugar Bombing World, basically this this is obviously quite a dire image, what kind of thoughts do people have about this little comic, about this little graphic? If you anything, if you feel positively about it, if you feel negatively about it, yeah.
I think I agree that it's quite true about how you're kind of viewed and how you're expected to experience relationships. Traditionally heteronormative monogamous relationships are like you meet someone and after a certain amount of time it's acceptable to start dating them, and then it's acceptable to get married, and then you're expected to have children at a certain point, and then I definitely agree that the fact that this elevator is like one track. It's like there's no going backwards, and there's no other options. It's from here to the end goal, and that's kind of the whole point of everything. I suppose is just to get to the end goal. I suppose I definitely agree that's how relationships are viewed typically.
Yeah, and I think you touched on something there. The comic says itself, like the only way is up. But you also said, there's no kind of going back. There's no kind of like switching up the order. There's no, I feel like the order is like a lot more flexible these days. In the past, you'd say like you need to get married and then you have kids. Now, not so much. Some people don't get married, they might have kids, or they might live together before they get married. The steps can be mixed around, but like the broad expectation is that like the expectations are still there. Divorce and not living together, when you're in a relationship, etc. Is becoming more commonplace, but is still frowned upon, or at least viewed with suspicion. Literally last week, I was engaging on Twitter for my sins, and there was a huge discussion about like whether it was detrimental to a relationship if people had separate bedrooms. Like never mind separate homes, separate bedrooms. So kind of what does that say? Like why do you need to share a bed with your partner to prove love and commitment to them? Sure, that might make certain activities easier, but it's not going to say there's kind of pros and cons, right? Like some people really like their personal space more than others. Like some people might have kind of sensory issues that might make sharing a bed difficult, right? There's lots of different reasons why something as simple as sharing a bed might not be appropriate in a relationship. I've talked about kind of big commitment steps like getting married and kind of legal, financial stuff. But even kind of small expectations, like in relationships, being monogamous for one, but some people have expectations of not watching porn when you're in a relationship, for instance. That's something that's very hotly debated. Basically this is just to get you thinking about like expectations in relationships in general, why they exist, who they serve, right? And kind of that's what kind of relationship anarchy wants you to question, like to think about like every single decision that you make in a relationship. Do you actually want to do this? Why is it important to you? What kind of feelings does it elicit in you if that's not being done? What do you worry about happening in the future if, say, your partner takes a little bit too long to propose? There are entire reality shows based on people who, has anyone seen The Ultimatum on Netflix? Yeah, okay. Well, The Ultimatum, a few people than expected, but The Ultimatum is basically like a show about people who, like one person really wants to get married ASAP and the other person is reluctant for whatever reason, and they end up doing like a partner swap experiment where like the people who want to get married ASAP get paired up and the people who don't want to get married obviously like is a hot mess. You know, that reality show and a lot of other reality shows, you know, while they're obviously not, you know, accurate depictions of relationships in real life, they really show the kind of pressure that so many of us are under to get married, to show commitment. And a lot of people are like, well, what is a relationship if they won't put a ring on it, right? Okay, so that's enough of that. So if everyone could just kind of open their booklets. And yeah, just kind of let's take a look through this short instructional manifesto. I'm not expecting you to read all of it right away, right now, but just to look at the text in bold. There's like 10 tenets, and yeah, the whole thing is quite short. So this manifesto for relationship anarchy was written in, I believe, I forgot whether it was 2008 or 2010, but it was like around that time, by a person called Andy Norgren. In 2006, there we go, and it was translated in 2014. And yeah, basically kind of discusses like the politics of kind of anarchy as applied to relationships. And I figured, you know, we're not going to have the time to go through all 10 of these today, but I really encourage you after this to kind of look at this in detail, have a think about the kind of you know, questions and feelings that come up for you. But today we're just going to focus on 3. So let's start with the one on the board. The first one: love is abundant and every relationship is unique. So, any immediate thoughts on this? Yeah?
It moves away from like a scarcity mindset.
Yeah? Would you like to elaborate a little more on that?
Well, rather than seeing things as like limited and that there's only so much, I feel like it's because self-explanatory. Like rather than seeing stuff as limited and like there's only so much out there, seeing it as like a vast kind of scope where you can have, and there is as much as you'd ever want, you know?
Yeah, so the idea of love in abundance, and kind of how that kind of rubs up against like the scarcity mindset. So Koshka's touched on capitalism, and capitalism teaches us that resources are scarce and we need to compete for the same resources, and some people are going to get those more than others. You know, there is an element of truth to that, right? Like we live under the kind of that system. In many ways, kind of capitalism has kind of seeped into love and relationships in terms of, you know, like even kind of terms like saying someone is on or off the market, you know, to denote whether they're taken or whether they're single, you know, or kind of like basketball terms, like when you say like you've scored someone, right? That's kind of an element of like competition in there. And yeah, like, you know, I'm sure that's just kind of off the top of my head, but there's like a lot of competition and possessive language, etc. That is kind of used like in very common everyday language when we talk about romantic relationships. And the scarcity mindset is basically kind of, you know, talking about that when it comes to you know, if our partner's interested in someone else, you know, maybe they see someone on the street and they turn their head and look at them for a little too long, or they might like someone's photo on Instagram. That can, you know, for some people, that can create a certain level of insecurity. You know, oh, my partner's into that person, or you know, they find that attractive. You know, what have I done? What have I done that's been that's led them to look somewhere else? And does that mean that I'm deficient? Does that mean I'm not enough? What does it mean about me? And a lot of people kind of, you know, because of the way that relationships, kind of our lives are structured around like romance and marriage and, you know, kind of those like expectations, a lot of people end up tying a lot of their identity to their relationships, to their romantic relationships specifically. And we're typically taught to place like our romantic relationships at you know, the top of, you know, the hierarchy in terms of kind of like what relationship is the most important relationship in our lives. You know, I'm sure a lot of you have had an experience where a very close friend of yours started not spending as much time with you when they got into a romantic relationship. Or maybe you've been in a situation where your partner didn't want you spending too much time with a close friend because they were threatened and are worried that you might cheat on them. Or even, you could be like on the other end of that situation where, your friendship with someone was kind of distanced because of an insecure partner. And so kind of what does that mean? Like, why do we prioritize romantic relationships above, platonic, familial, why is that? And, especially given that romantic relationships are so, they can be emotional roller coasters, right? You feel a lot, there's a lot of passion, there's a lot of excitement. And they can also be unstable in that way because you place a lot of expectations on them. People tend to have much longer term friendships than they do relationships. A lot of people have childhood friends, and not so many people can say that they've been with their childhood sweetheart for 20 years. So, in terms of this idea of like love being abundant in every relationship, being unique, like what that's kind of speaking to is that all of your relationships have value, not just your romantic relationships. Your platonic relationships also bring like a different kind of fulfillment and connection to your life. And it's important not to put all of your expectations on one person. And you don't have to necessarily do that with multiple romantic relationships like I do. I just mean being able to seek community and expand your support network, whether that is one romantic partner and lots of close friends, or multiple romantic partners, or whatever combination of the above. So, also an interesting question I like to ask people is, what is the difference between like a platonic connection and a romantic connection? Like, what are the things that are present in a romantic relationship that are not in a platonic one? Yeah.
It's kind of like possessiveness and like kind of like you own the other person is like kind of really romantic relationships. And I think that's why they're also like valued more because it's like because you kind of like own them, it's something you earn and like something that you can kind of prove like look what I've got. Whereas like friendships you kind of just have to like I don't know, you don't own them. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really good one. You wouldn't say like, like my friend isn't allowed to have another friend. I need to make sure my friend isn't talking to other people. You wouldn't say that. Anything else? Like kind of what's the difference between like a platonic and a romantic relationship? Yeah.
If I'm married to someone, I'm somewhat entitled for a visa to go to their country. But if I'm just friends with someone, I have no right to visit them.
What if you get married to your friend?
Then I might lose my citizenship. Because my country does not support same-sex marriage or somewhat. So.
Okay. Well, hypothetically, if you had a friend who was not of the same sex, and you got married, and the government was under the assumption that you were in a romantic relationship, but you were in a platonic relationship, you got married, you'd still have those visitation rights. But that's a not to call you out there. That's an example of, but that is an example of how like romantic love, like there is that expectation of marriage is kind of tied into that, right? Whereas, a lot of people have never thought about marrying someone who wasn't a romantic partner, but that is something that some people in this world do, and not just for visa reasons. Yeah. Okay, and so let's see. I think the big elephant in the room about like the difference between kind of platonic and romantic affection that a lot of people bring up to me online and in person and whatever is sex. But again, the boundaries between those are blurred because a romantic relationship is not simply friendship plus sex, because that's we have friends with benefits for that, and a friends with benefits relationship is not the same as a romantic relationship. And equally, there are also romantic relationships that don't have sex. Asexual people who, don't experience sexual attraction, or people who simply just aren't interested in sex as part of their romantic relationship. That's also a thing. And so, if you take sex out of the equation, then what really is the difference? Is it vibes? I'm not expecting an immediate answer here right away, by the way, but yeah.
I guess you can think of it as like a sort of linguistic shorthand, almost like romantic. I say Platonic romantic, you can always just think of them as like the letter X, the letter Y. They have no meaning in themselves, but they're just a short word that we can attach meaning and refer to back after. So if I'm in a Platonic relationship with someone, that itself has no meaning, but between me and that friend, we ascribe the word Platonic meaning, certain things we will do, we won't do, boundaries we have, and therefore I can later refer, rather than go through a whole long paragraphs of our relationship, I could just use the word Platonic, and the same with romantic.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing with that is it means that if you have multiple Platonic relationships or multiple romantic relationships, they're not all the same, because with every person, you've redefined the word Platonic and romantic. So in theory, you could have a romantic and a Platonic relationship with the exact same commitments, or you could have completely different ones.
Yes, yeah, that's
the word you use. Really.
Excellent point that you made there. Ultimately, these are labels, right? And it's more important that you're on the same page about like your expectations and your commitments than the actual label that you have. Like, does it matter that you have a ring on your finger if your partner's not making you feel safe, right? Does it matter that you have children together if you don't feel connected in your relationship? What's more important, the structure or how you feel and the level of kind of safety and security that you experience, within that connection? Kind of theoretically, right? Like you could, someone's platonic relationship might look like someone else's romantic relationship. But I suppose kind of what you're speaking to about like the shorthand is that in romantic relationships, those come with, kind of more prescribed definitions of kind of what that involves, that friendship. And again, why is that? Oh gosh, I've spent more time talking about that than I expected. Okay, so I've kind of touched on this a little bit already, but let's move on to, which number was it? Oh, second one, okay. Love and respect instead of entitlement. So, we've already kind of spoken a little bit about kind of how romantic relationships, romantic monogamous relationships, and just how relationships in general can have an element of possessiveness, and possessiveness can sometimes lead to entitlement. Can anyone think of an example of when someone has felt entitled to something because they are in a romantic relationship with someone else? Yeah?
I mean, for example, if you're in a romantic relationship with someone, you would have certain commitments and boundaries. Like, let's say, call for, 45 minutes each day. And then if your partner would not do that, for example, you might feel entitled for that, even if it's not convenient for them or they're unavailable or something like that. So if your partner would make a mistake or not be able to fulfill that commitment at a particular moment, you might feel entitled to for them to fulfill that later on.
Yeah, so that would be an example of, you've made an agreement to talk on the phone for a certain amount of time every day, and
I don't know, it could be anything.
Yeah, sure, but with kind of that specific example, your partner's broken that agreement and you feel a certain type of way about that and you want to go to them and feel, this means a certain amount to me, blah, blah, blah. But, yeah.
I think a big one is probably like marital rates and the expectation of sex.
Yes.
But especially as you say for like relationships with people that people that fall under the asexual spectrum, and like there's not really a room for there not to be sex, especially because of the pressure to have children and just general expectations of what relationships look like. So definitely like entitlement, and I think the idea of the expectation of sex in romantic relationships.
Entitlement to sex is definitely a big one, and obviously there's we can talk about how the kind of patriarchy comes into that, and procreation, etc., and that expectation comes into that. And you have spoken about like kind of creating specific agreements, and it would make sense to follow up with a partner about like, hey, we created this agreement. Why do we need to renegotiate? Like, what happened? Why haven't you called me? The specific example of entitlement that you've talked about is something that isn't necessarily discussed, right? You know, we can talk a lot about consent and how just because you wanted sex on Tuesday doesn't necessarily mean you wanted sex on Friday. But being in a relationship, you know, sometimes like there is that assumption that you're down. And so what does love and respect kind of look like? You know, that's going to be you know, checking in with your partner's feelings in a moment rather than being like, well, we're in a relationship, we're in this structure, and therefore I get to have this. Rather than, this is how my partner is feeling, and they're, you know, wanting to do that with me, and therefore we get to do this. Yes?
I wanted to say on the assumptions point as well, that sometimes it's not just like societally expected to have, say, sex within marriage, it's also like legally, because you can have your marriage annulled, and then especially like with going back to the visa thing, then you can have like insecure migration status, so it's not even necessarily just unwritten laws, sometimes they are written.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You know, really, really, really great point made there. You know, that's a whole separate lecture about how kind of monogamy is enshrined in the law, and how yeah, you know, even kind of, you know, like there's a case actually. How much time do I have? I'm gonna very briefly talk about a legal case in Colombia in South America that happened, I think, last year. And it was reported in like a South American magazine that I read about. But basically there was a gay throuple, so that's like you know, 3 people who are all in a polyamorous relationship with each other. And 2 of them are married, and the 3rd person had been with them for 10 years. And basically one of the spouses in that dynamic died. And he had like a pension fund, you know, which would mean kind of, I'm not really sure about the logistics. It would basically, you know, like people would get kind of paid out like, you know, life insurance. They'd get like a substantial benefit of some kind. And you know, under the law, yeah, like the spouse got that payment, but the partner, lover, who had been living with them for 10 years and had, you know, cared for him like through his illness, etc., didn't get anything at all. So they went to court and they challenged that. And basically, what they when it came down to what was enshrined in the law, it says that the kind of survivorship payment, or whatever you call it, there were 2 categories of people who would be able to get that payment. One was a legally married spouse, and the second group of people was a lover who did not live with them. So, a mistress. And so what does that say? That in Colombian law, someone who the partner would have been cheating on, you know, unbeknownst to the spouse, had more rights than a lover who lived with them and, you know, like that was kind of consented to and known about for 10 years. Obviously, they challenged that in court, and I believe that has been changed now, but it was wild to me that, you know, theoretically, an affair partner would have had more rights than a polyamorous one. Okay. Actually, yeah, on the question of kind of, you know, entitlement, you know, when you move away from entitlement, when you move away from thinking like, well, we've done these steps, and therefore I get to have these things, you start having to examine things on a case-by-case basis. And also, you know, negotiating agreements that are very flexible and renegotiable. And that obviously leads to, you know, a lot more autonomy, right? Because you're not necessarily bound to whatever you've agreed to in the past. You have the power to change your mind, to speak to, you know, your friend or your partner, whoever, you know, you're in connection with, and, you know, say, this isn't working for me. You know, is there a way that we can renegotiate this so that it does work for us both, right? So, in that sense, kind of let's explore like the idea of like independence and autonomy within a relationship. People, you know, you might have seen kind of terms online about like being codependent, or, you know, like like overly, you know, independent, or being interdependent in relationships. You know, like, does anyone have thoughts on like the relationship between, well, you know, being in a relationship and kind of the tie between that and independence and autonomy?
I think there's like this idea of like, if you're in a relationship, you also have to hold on to this independence and sort of do things on your own, and obviously that is important to like keep yourself as you are. Then I think especially with like newer relationships, that like it's your independent choice to also spend time with your partner. And I think it's like this idea that your independence has to be you solely on your own is a little bit crazy, because it's like, well, if you've sort of got a partner or even a friend that you are spending more time with because they're new in your life and you want to see them like more, it's like that's your choice as an independent, and it's your choice as like an autonomous person to spend that time as well as spending time on your own. And it's like with my relationship, I had someone tell me that I was spending like too much time with my partner, but it was like in reality we just sort of, I was seeing this person more because they were new in my life, and it's like that doesn't mean I'm stripping away my own independence. It's just sort of like adding, it's like my choice to be independent but also with this person.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of so many different ways, you know, we could go with kind of what you've just said there. And if you want to, I haven't put this as further reading there, but if you'd like to kind of look further into like the concept of like, commitment, independence, like how like those things can sometimes but not always be at war with each other, and concepts like that. I really recommend looking up Esther Perel. Maybe some of you have heard of her. She's a psychotherapist. She runs the podcast Where Should We Begin? She's probably one of the most famous therapists in the world, I would say. And she talks a lot about like passion and desire in long-term relationships, and how when people feel like obligated or committed, suddenly they don't feel as free, and they therefore don't feel as much passion or desire, and kind of exploring that relationship. And so yeah, that's just kind of something on the side. Okay, how much time are we at? Sorry, did I have until like 2:45 or did I have until 3? I've forgotten.
So you've got till 2:50 is when you come out, and so if you just have a few minutes for general Q&A at the end. So
Cool. Yeah. Okay. Let's go to the final tenet at the end of the booklet, which is customize your commitments. And these are things that like I've already kind of touched on in some sense, but given like what we've talked about, I hope you can kind of think about kind of various steps that have typically been tied to commitment, and various expectations that have typically been tied to commitment. We've spoken about entitlement, to sex, to time in a relationship, to marriage, to kids, right? To emotional labor, and think about, like, what do each of those things mean to you? Kind of what value does it bring to your life beyond, affirmation of devotion and commitment in your relationship? And what does that mean in practice? We talk a little bit about kind of balancing autonomy and commitment, and the way I phrase this question, I might rephrase that, but because they're not necessarily opposed to each other. Sometimes they are, but not necessarily. So thinking about those two concepts, and how that applies to your life. And finally, how will you customize your relationship with people? Not just romantic ones, but platonic ones. Can you imagine a world where you married your best friend instead of a romantic partner? Lived with multiple people instead of one, typically like until old age. I think the definitions of relationships are breaking down, over time, right? At first it was kind of challenging. It must be a man and a woman and 2.5 kids in a relationship. And I think, even kind of exploring like power dynamics and kind of desire and, kink, right? Like that's another thing that is kind of challenging standard norms within relationships. And I would say non-monogamy is the kind of, I wouldn't say like the next frontier necessarily, but it's something that is being talked about a lot more, especially in the last year and a half, especially since the pandemic, I've noticed. And I think that's partially because the pandemic was such a profound period of isolation for so many people that so many people came out of lockdown realizing they needed intimacy and community, and intimacy not necessarily in the sexual sense. I mean, just literally in the kind of connection sense. And also there is something about seeing, confronting mortality, which is what the pandemic has done to all of us. That makes people question their life decisions. You only live once. Am I making the best decisions for my life? Is this it? Is there more? As Esther said in one of her lectures. So, yeah, to that end, think about the things that you want to do with your life and what meaning they have, why you want to do them, whether the people you want to do them with, actually authentically wants them to do what they should, and also kind of think about that, with your friends, even something as basic as, if you have, your monthly brunch, is that something that everyone necessarily wants to do, or just because you feel like you've been doing it all this time, so you feel like you should? Okay, so I think I'm gonna, end kind of this presentation there, and in terms of kind of further resources, I mentioned, not on this slide, Esther Perel, she's got 2 TED Talks on YouTube. If you see nothing else by her, watch those 2 TED Talks. She's got a podcast and she's written 2 books. One is called Mating in Captivity, which is about desire in long-term relationships. And the other one is called The State of Affairs, which is about infidelity and how infidelity is perceived by society and how infidelity is not as black and white as people think it is. I've got my page up there, and Stepping Off the Relationship Escalator is a really, really great relationship anarchy source to get you thinking about, the relationship escalator which we discussed, and, kind of what, thinking about those individual steps and, what stepping off it might look like for some people. The relationship anarchy smorgasbord is a diagram that you can find online. If you Google it, it looks very complicated and overwhelming, but it's actually a very useful tool for all your connections. And the relationship anarchy manifesto you've got right here. There's also a book, I think it's been translated to English now, by a Spanish author that might be useful to look into.
So we've got a couple of minutes for any final questions before we wrap up. Hand in the air if you have burning questions. Yeah.
I feel like as a society we're very conditioned to kind of be offended / take it personally when our partners can express interest in other people. We're taught to be very possessive of our relationships. And I wondered if as a polyamory expert you have advice on dismantling those feelings and how you should feel you should be more open. I don't know, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. Someone else here mentioned something about the scarcity mindset, and something that in my work I talk a lot about is moving from the scarcity mindset to the abundance mindset. So, we engage in kind of zero-sum thinking a lot of the time. My partner's interested in someone else, and therefore they're not interested in me, or I'm deficient, or I'm not enough. Like you said, there is the kind of knee-jerk reaction to take it personally. And understanding that it isn't necessarily personal. I mean, sometimes, your partner's being a dick, but, other times, their interest in someone else has nothing to do with you. And I think, if it is an insecurity that you're experiencing within your relationship, then that's something to bring up to your partner, but, that's not necessarily because of kind of that action that they did with other people, kind of what's been going on within your relationship more broadly that might have triggered that feeling in you. And also, what relationship do you have with yourself, and kind of, how you're comparing yourself to whatever kind of that third person was. And what feelings does that elicit? And there's so much in that about desirability and kind of how certain people are perceived as more desirable than others, and I could go into that. I suggest kind of looking up scarcity mindset to abundance mindset kind of stuff. There's lots of resources online about it. And again, this is universally applicable, not just to non-monogamous relationships, but it's about kind of thinking just because someone gets this thing, it doesn't necessarily mean I lose this thing. There's enough to go around, and you know, you can all win. You know. So yeah, okay. Anything else?
That's a fantastic place to end on. I'm so sorry that we are at 10 to, and I know that there are people lurking outside, super keen to get in. But I think you might be able to, if you want to stick around and ask a question after, please say thank you very much. And thanks for all your fantastic contributions. I'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow.